A simple elderly woman snubbed at a luxury cruise terminal. Minutes later, her rich son arrives with the captain. Margaret Wilson adjusted her modest beige cardigan as she stepped out of the taxi at Port Everglades, Beach, Florida. At 73, she still maintained the dignified posture her late husband had always admired, though her arthritic hands betrayed her age as she fumbled with her small, rolling suitcase. "Yeen, ma'am, you need to move along," barked a harried port employee, barely glancing at her as crowds of excited passengers streamed toward the massive white cruise ship dominating the horizon. The Royal Meridian gleamed like a floating palace against the cloudless blue sky, its 18 decks promising luxury Margaret had only read about in magazines. The humid Florida air clung to her skin as she approached the VIP check-in area, her heart fluttering with anticipation. This was to be her first vacation since Harold's passing 3 years ago. The cruise had been a surprise, an email confirmation appearing in her inbox with a note saying simply, "You deserve this. With love, excuse me," Margaret said softly to a young woman in a crisp white uniform at the entrance to the premium boarding area. "I believe I'm supposed to check in here." The attendant, her name tag read Ashley, glanced at Margaret's wrinkled cotton slacks and sensible shoes, then at her simple luggage with visible skepticism. "This area is for suite guests only," she said, her voice tinged with condescension. "Regular boarding is over there." She pointed toward a crowded line snaking around the terminal. "But I think I have a suite reservation," Margaret insisted, fumbling in her purse for the printed confirmation. "It says owner's suite right here." Ashley barely glanced at the paper. "There must be some mistake. Owner's suites start at $20,000 per voyage." Her eyes swept over Margaret's modest appearance once more. "Perhaps you misunderstood the reservation." Heat rose to Margaret's cheeks as several well-dressed passengers turned to stare. "Deju, I don't believe there's been a mistake," she said, her voice smaller now. "Listen," Ashley replied with exaggerated patience. "Why don't you check with the main desk? They can sort out your actual reservation." She was already looking past Margaret to the wealthy couple approaching behind her. Margaret clutched her purse tighter, feeling suddenly out of place and foolish. Perhaps there had been a mistake. Perhaps the email wasn't meant for her after all. She stepped aside, blinking back tears as she watched passengers in designer clothes sweep past with their luxury luggage. A security guard approached, his expression stern. "Ma'am, if you don't have the proper boarding credentials, I'll need to ask you to move to the general boarding area." Margaret nodded silently, her earlier excitement evaporating in the humid air. She turned toward the crowded regular check-in line, shoulders slumped slightly, when her phone rang. The screen showed a name that instantly warmed her heart. Michael. Michael Wilson ended the call with his mother and slammed his fist against the leather seat of his Tesla. "Driver, get me to Port Everglades immediately. Terminal A." His voice, normally measured and controlled in boardrooms, now carried an edge that brooked no argument. At 45, Michael had built Wilson Technologies from a garage startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Business magazines called him brilliant, ruthless, and enigmatic, the tech world's most eligible bachelor who preferred algorithms to relationships and privacy to publicity. Few knew about his humble beginnings or the sacrifices his mother had made to put him through college after his father lost his job. "Is everything all right, sir?" asked his assistant, Jessica, from the seat beside him, already typing rapidly on her tablet. "No. The cruise line is treating my mother like she doesn't belong there." His jaw tightened. "Call Captain Reynolds immediately. Tell him I'm on my way." Jessica nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. In 15 years, she'd never seen Michael truly angry, focused, intense, demanding, yes, but never with this quiet fury emanating from him now. "Captain Reynolds, on the line," she said moments later, handing him her phone. "Hi, James. It's Michael Wilson." His voice was controlled, but ice-cold. "There's been an incident involving my mother at your terminal. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Meet me at the VIP entrance." He ended the call without waiting for a response. The Tesla weaved through Miami traffic as Michael stared out the window, memories flooding back. His mother working double shifts at the diner, the second-hand clothes she'd carefully mended, the nights she'd spent helping him with science projects, the college tuition she'd somehow managed, one impossible payment at a time. He'd bought her a comfortable home in a nice neighborhood years ago, but she'd refused anything more extravagant. "I don't need fancy things to be happy, Michael," she always said. But he'd insisted on this cruise, a chance for her to experience true luxury, to be pampered the way she deserved after a lifetime of sacrifice. The car pulled up to the terminal just as Captain James Reynolds hurried outside, his decorated uniform gleaming in the sunlight. "Michael, what's happened?" asked the captain, genuine concern crossing his tanned face. Michael emerged from the car, straightening his custom-tailored suit. "My mother was just humiliated by your staff. She's 73 years old, James. I arranged an owner's suite for her as we discussed." Captain Reynolds frowned. "That's unacceptable. I personally approved the arrangement. She's somewhere in your regular boarding area now, probably confused and upset." Michael's voice remained low, but there was no mistaking his anger. "I want whoever was responsible for this to understand exactly who they've disrespected today." "Of course," the captain nodded, already gesturing to his first officer nearby. "It will find her immediately." As they strode into the terminal, conversations halted, and heads turned. Michael Wilson was rarely photographed and avoided public appearances, but something in his bearing commanded attention without seeking it. The power he carried wasn't in flashy displays, but in the certainty of his movement and the intensity of his focus. "There she is," Michael said, spotting his mother sitting alone on a bench, looking small and defeated. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, wishing she'd never agreed to this cruise. She'd been perfectly content in her modest home in Savannah, with her garden and book club. This world of luxury and privilege wasn't meant for people like her. "Mom," came a familiar voice, cutting through her thoughts. She looked up to see her son striding toward her, his expression a mixture of concern and controlled anger. Behind him followed a distinguished man in a captain's uniform and several flustered-looking cruise staff. "Michael!" Margaret rose, confusion crossing her face. "What are you doing here? I thought you were in Seattle until next week." Michael embraced her gently. "I wanted to surprise you at the port, but it seems I'm a bit late." He turned to the captain. "This is my mother, Margaret Wilson." Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his manner respectful and warm. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Captain James Reynolds. I can't express how deeply sorry I am for this misunderstanding. Your son has been a dear friend and valued associate of our cruise line for many years." Margaret blinked in surprise. "Oh, it's quite all right. I'm sure it was just a mix-up." "It was not all right," Michael said firmly, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "And it was not a mix-up." The staff behind the captain shifted uncomfortably. Among them, Margaret recognized Ashley, whose face had drained of color. "Mrs. Wilson," the captain continued, "your suite has been specially prepared according to your son's instruction. If you'll allow us, we'd be honored to escort you aboard now." He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Margaret hesitated, glancing at her son. "Michael, what's going on? What did you do?" "Nothing extravagant," he replied with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just booked a nice cabin for my mother, who deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of what she's wearing or what kind of luggage she carries." Ashley stepped forward, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Mrs. Wilson, I am so sorry for the misunderstanding earlier. If there's anything at all I can do to make your journey more comfortable..." Margaret, never one to hold grudges, nodded politely. "We all make mistakes, dear. No lasting harm done." Michael's expression suggested he didn't share his mother's forgiveness, but he remained silent as Captain Reynolds personally escorted them through a private entrance, bypassing the usual boarding procedures. As they walked, Margaret noticed people staring and whispering. A businessman nearby nudged his companion and muttered something about Wilson technology and billionaire founder. "Michael," she whispered, realization dawning. "Do these people know you?" "Some might," he admitted, guiding her gently forward. I try to keep a low profile, but in certain circles, is that why everyone's suddenly being so nice to me? Her voice held a note of disappointment. Michael stopped, turning to face her. "No, Mom. The suite was always yours. The VIP treatment was always arranged. None of this is special treatment because of who I am. It's what you paid for. What anyone who books an owner's suite is entitled to." His eyes softened. The problem wasn't that they suddenly recognized me. The problem was that they judged you based on appearances before I arrived. Captain Reynolds, pretending not to overhear, diplomatically stepped a few paces away to give them privacy. Margaret considered this as she looked around the opulent boarding area. "It's a different world, isn't it?" "It is," Michael agreed. "One that too often values the wrong things." The owner's suite took Margaret's breath away, spanning nearly 1,500 square feet on the ship's highest deck. It featured a private veranda, marble bathroom, and panoramic views of the ocean that seemed to stretch into infinity. Fresh flowers perfumed the air, and a bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket beside a handwritten welcome note from the captain. "Michael, this is too much," Margaret whispered, as a white-gloved steward showed them around the suite. "I wouldn't know what to do with all this space." Michael smiled, genuinely this time. "Just enjoy it, Mom. Read books on the balcony. Order room service at midnight if you want. Sleep in until noon. At my age, I'm up at 5 every morning without an alarm." She laughed, running her fingers over the plush sofa. "You didn't need to spend this kind of money. Consider it a fraction of what I owe you," he replied simply. When the steward had gone, Margaret turned to her son with the piercing look that had kept him honest since childhood. "Now tell me what you meant earlier about being a valued associate of this cruise line. Just how much influence do you have here, Michael?" Michael hesitated, then sighed. "Wilson Tech provides all the navigation and communication systems for their fleet. We also develop their booking software and passenger management platform." Margaret's eyes widened. "So, you practically own part of this ship?" "Not exactly, but we're an important partner." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the discussion of his success. As always, a knock at the door interrupted them. Captain Reynolds entered, now accompanied by an elegant woman in an executive suit. "Mrs. Wilson, I'd like to introduce Elena Vasquez, Vice President of Guest Relations for Royal Caribbean International," the captain said. "Mrs. Wilson, I've come personally to extend our deepest apologies," Elena said, her tone sincere. "What happened today falls far below our standards, and there will be appropriate consequences. We'd be honored if you would join the captain and senior staff for dinner tonight." Margaret glanced at Michael, who gave a small nod. "That's very kind, thank you," she replied. After they left, Margaret sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, suddenly looking tired. "I never wanted special treatment, Michael. I was so excited about this trip because I thought it would be a normal vacation. Just me, anonymous among 2,000 other passengers." Michael sat beside her. "Mom, after everything you've done for me, why won't you let me do things for you?" She patted his hand. "Because I didn't make sacrifices so you would repay me. I did it because I love you. And I'm doing this because I love you," he countered. "Is that so hard to accept?" Margaret gazed out at the sparkling ocean. "When your father lost his job and we could barely keep the house, I promised myself I would never take anything for granted again. I've lived by that promise." She turned to him. "I'm afraid of getting used to all this, afraid of becoming someone who expects special treatment." Michael considered this. What if it's not about the luxury, but about being treated with basic dignity? That woman today didn't see you. Not really. She saw an old lady in ordinary clothes and made assumptions. "People make assumptions every day," Margaret said quietly. "Usually, they don't matter." "They should always matter," Michael insisted. "Every person deserves respect, regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they have." Margaret smiled sadly. "That's a beautiful thought, but not how the world works." "Then maybe the world needs changing," Michael replied. Margaret stood at the captain's table that evening, feeling distinctly out of place despite the simple black dress Michael had somehow procured for her. Around her, wealthy passengers in designer evening wear chatted about vacation homes and investment portfolios, while Captain Reynolds ensured her champagne glass never empty. "And what do you do, Mrs. Wilson?" asked a tanned man with a Swiss accent, clearly making polite conversation. "I'm retired now," she replied with a small smile. "I was a high school English teacher for 35 years. "How lovely," his wife murmured, already looking past her for more interesting company. "Teachers shaped all our lives," said Captain Reynolds warmly. "A noble profession." Elena Vasquez, seated at Margaret's other side, leaned closer. Your son mentioned you were instrumental in his education. Wilson Technologies is changing the world. You must be incredibly proud." Margaret nodded, though these conversations about Michael always made her uncomfortable. She'd read about his company's innovation and seen the staggering valuations in business news. But to her, he was still the curious boy who'd taken apart every appliance in their house to see how it worked. Across the dining room, she spotted Ashley, the check-in attendant, serving drinks instead of manning the VIP desk. Their eyes met briefly before the young woman quickly looked away. "Excuse me," Margaret said, rising from her seat. Despite Michael's subtle look of concern, she made her way across the room. "Mrs. Wilson," Ashley said nervously when Margaret approached. "I'm so sorry about earlier today." Margaret studied the young woman, noting her reddened eyes and tense posture. "You've been demoted," she observed. Ashley nodded miserably. "Just temporarily," they said. "A learning opportunity." She bit her lip. "I deserved it. I was horrible to you." "Was it your first day in that position?" Margaret asked. Ashley looked surprised. "How did you know?" "I taught high school for 35 years. I know nervousness when I see it." Margaret smiled gently. "You were trying to seem confident and in control, weren't you?" "I was terrified of making a mistake," Ashley admitted. "Then I made the worst one possible." Margaret considered this. "You know, judging people by appearances is a mistake we all make. The real test is what we learn from it." Ashley's eyes welled with tears. "I could lose my job over this. My mother depends on my income for her medications." Margaret felt a pang of recognition. "You support your mother?" Ashley nodded. "She's disabled. This job, the benefits are helping her get treatment she couldn't otherwise afford." Margaret made a decision. "Finish your shift, then come to suite 1804 later. We should talk." Back at the table, Michael raised an eyebrow questioningly. "That young woman has a story you should hear," Margaret said quietly. "Sonnet? One that might remind you of our own." Later that night, Margaret sat with Ashley in the suite's living room while Michael listened from the sidelines. "I was trying so hard to fit in with the VIP staff," Ashley explained. "They told me to make sure only the right people got through. I thought," she trailed off, embarrassed. "You thought I wasn't the right sort of person," Margaret finished for her. Ashley nodded miserably. Michael started to speak, but Margaret raised a hand to stop him. "Michael, do you remember Mr. Peterson at your high school? The guidance counselor who told you not to bother applying to MIT because kids from our neighborhood don't get into schools like that?" Michael's expression darkened at the memory. "I remember. And do you remember what I told you after that meeting? You said he was wrong about me, but right about the odds," Michael recited, "and that I needed to work twice as hard because of it." Margaret turned back to Ashley. "People make judgments based on their experiences and bias. It doesn't make it right, but it is human. The question is, what will you learn?" Ashley straightened her shoulders. "That I should treat everyone with respect, regardless of how they look or what I assume about them." "A good start," Margaret agreed. "Tui, now tell my son about your mother's condition." As Ashley described her mother's multiple sclerosis and the struggles they'd faced accessing health care, Michael's expression gradually changed from skepticism to genuine interest. By the time she finished, he was asking detailed questions about her background and education. After Ashley left, Michael turned to his mother with newfound respect. "You saw yourself in her, didn't you?" "I saw you in her," Margaret corrected. "Young, under pressure, making mistakes but trying desperately to take care of family. She smiled. She has potential, don't you think? Michael nodded slowly. Our Miami office could use someone with her determination. A chance is sometimes all people need, Margaret said. You taught me that. The cruise ship sliced through calm Caribbean waters as Margaret stood on her private veranda, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in strokes of pink and gold. 5 days into the 7-day voyage, she had settled into a rhythm she never expected to enjoy. Breakfast on the balcony, reading novels in the adults-only solarium, afternoons exploring ports of call, and evenings trying cuisines she'd only read about. More coffee, Mrs. Wilson asked her sweet attendant, Roberto, who had quickly learned her preference for strong coffee with just a touch of cream. Thank you, Roberto. And please, I've told you to call me Margaret. He smiled as he refilled her cup. Will you be joining the shore excursion in St. Thomas today? Yes, though nothing too strenuous. Perhaps the historical walking tour? After Roberto left, Margaret checked her phone and found a message from Michael. How's the vacation? Too extravagant yet? She smiled, typing back, I could get used to having a butler. Don't tell your younger self I said that. A knock at the door surprised her. Opening it, she found Ashley standing there in her uniform, looking nervous but determined. Mrs. Wilson, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to thank you before we dock tomorrow. Margaret invited her in. How has your week been? Better, Ashley admitted. The senior staff have been watching me closely but fair. She hesitated. And your son's company contacted me yesterday. They've offered me an interview for a customer relations position in Miami. Margaret beamed. That's wonderful news. I don't understand why you helped me, Ashley said. After how I treated you, Margaret considered this. Because 40 years ago, I was you, working multiple jobs, supporting family, making mistakes. The difference was that someone gave me grace when I needed it most. She smiled. My late husband's boss could have fired him when he made a serious error. Instead, he mentored him, and that made all the difference for our family. They chatted until Ashley needed to return to work. As Margaret watched her leave, Captain Reynolds appeared in the hallway. Mrs. Wilson, I was coming to personally invite you to the farewell dinner tonight, he said. That's very kind, but I think I'd prefer a quiet evening, Margaret replied. This trip has given me quite enough excitement. The captain nodded understandingly. Your son is an extraordinary man. Now I see where he gets it from. After he left, Margaret returned to the veranda, reflecting on the journey, not just the cruise, but the long path from the struggling young mother she'd been to the woman she was now. She'd spent decades putting others first, her students, her husband, her son. This week had been her first experience of being the one cared for, of accepting that perhaps she deserved a little luxury too. Her phone buzzed with another message from Michael. I've been thinking about what you said, about the world needing changing. Maybe it starts with seeing people for who they are, not what they have. You taught me that. Love you, Mom. Margaret smiled, typing back, I've been thinking too. Maybe accepting kindness isn't weakness after all. Maybe it's allowing others the joy of giving. I love you too. As the ship sailed onward toward Miami, Margaret Wilson watched flying fish leap alongside the hull, grateful for the unfolding journey and the simple, profound lesson she'd finally learned. That dignity belonged to everyone, and grace, both giving and receiving it, was perhaps the greatest luxury of all.